we're going to talk a little bit about how do you find the right journal? How do you know where to try to publish? First of all, you should see what kind of articles they publish. As I've said previously, you need to look at the background of your references and see, do you keep seeing the same journal over and over? Obviously, they've done something about your topic. Now, that can be a good thing and a bad thing because it could also mean that they've already published a whole lot about it and they're done. But you do need to look and see because the journal will give you an indication of who's their audience. And part of what you're trying to do is make sure that you're doing that good match between what the journal wants and you can match your research to that. Having said that, this means that you have to focus on what they want you to focus on. So if they say they want certain kinds of things, then you have to try to do that. Now, if it's some big journal and they only want studies that have lots of 300, 400 people in them and you don't have that, then you might be setting yourself up for rejection. Very few journals anymore do things like they used to in the olden days called case studies, which means you could have very small samples. So that's something to keep in mind. You do need to look at what they're saying they are looking at and doing. Look at their most recent volumes. You may not be able to read the articles, but you can look at the abstracts to sort of see what they're actually trying to do. There is a journal out there. One of the things, though, to keep in mind is you really want to make sure that you don't try to get into a predatory journal. Those are usually the journals that will make you pay a lot of money, and then they say they will publish you. Now, this sounds really great and wonderful, right? But part of what you're doing when you're trying to get published is not, ooh, look at me, I got published, but it's to further the study and to put information out there, because one of the main ways in medicine that we learn is through reading these journals and through gleaning new knowledge, because constantly research, and that we're applying this to improving patient care, improving hospital administration, those kinds of things. These journals are not having people review them, peer review. Now, I'm in a lot of editorial boards and I do a lot of reviewing. And one of the things that does is it does make sure that research is solid and sound. It should make sure that certain kinds of research that isn't solid or sound is not published. It can also help you improve your research by giving you feedback, saying, what about this? What about that? How did you focus on this? So it's sort of a two-way street. Doesn't always mean that it's great. They might reject you outright. It might be that they reject you outright or don't want your stuff because they publish, like I said, tons of it already, or because they have a certain audience and they want certain kinds of articles. So you will have to do your research. You will have to make a case for why you're doing this journal versus that journal, but it is worth it. I would make a list of journals. I've done that before with specific articles just to see. Sometimes, so for instance, we did something about, and we used a Canadian triage measure. So then we thought, oh, we could try Canadian journals. Well, come to find out a lot of people in Canada don't like that triage system and they switched. So they were highly critical of that and they reviewed us just like that. So that was a little bit not fun, but you still have to do the research and see where the best 5 or 6 journals are. Why is that a good match? And again, part of this whole process is not, I'm going to publish everything, but you're going to narrow down your research results, talk about your research in a way that's appropriate to them, that they want to hear, they want to see. And some of them actually have very strict limitations on how many words, how many authors. One thing to keep in mind, and I'll talk about this, I'll give you something in writing, but also is there are requirements for who gets to be where and who gets to be cited. So for your example, you would be first because you've done the most work, but also your project advisor would be second because they've also done a lot of work on each part of your research. Then my name would be third because I've given you feedback on every part of your research too. And a part of this, the reason people get to be authors on your research is because of the amount of work and effort that they've put into it. So if some outside person, another person has done the stats, they would maybe go fourth because they didn't come up with your initial lit review, they didn't do the methodology, they didn't do all of these other parts, so they would come later. Some journals only want 3 authors, some only want 4. There are limits to that, so you need to look at that also. But these are things to keep in mind, and come up with a list, and then you just start trying to Make it so that that journal likes what you've got to offer. But again, you've got to look at what they want, because if you don't put what they want and they're not the audience that they're trying to reach, and your stuff can't reach them in that way, they will reject you. So it's a long process, but if you do your research right and you pay attention to who your audience is, you can get your information out there. And it's not just to get published, but again, it's to put more knowledge out there so we can improve patient care. That's the whole purpose of this.